And we talked about that good things can often become idols, like the brazen serpent, which was really good. God told Moses to make it, put it on a pole, symbolize Christ. And when the people looked at it, they were healed. And then during the time of Hezekiah, which is hundreds of years later, it's still around, and the people are offering incense to it. It's like a good luck charm almost. And I think, that's what a lot of these idols were. They were kind of like good luck charms. And I think even, in Catholicism, when you had the St. Christopher statue on the dash of your car, that was more of a good luck thing, and I don't know if they ever did a study on how many people had them avoided accidents or what their insurance was.
Well, we have the rabbit's foot.
Well, the rabbit's foot, yeah. I mean, we never worshipped that, and I don't think people worshipped, the St. Christopher icon, but it was, when you get to Mary, I kind of feel a little bit more like, it seems like they almost worship Mary, not this Mary, or this Mary.
Just Tom.
Except Tom, the two times. Yeah. So, because making her an intermediary and making her really more than she really was, I mean, she was human. I mean, she said in the Magnificent, that, the God, my Savior, she recognized she was a sinner, and Catholics teach she was without sin, the Immaculate Conception. She never had any other kids, which is kind of hard to, they say, well, that word can be cousins.
Wouldn't you think God knows what's in your heart, so that even though you're praying to Mary, that He knows that you still love the Lord? That He can...
Well, there could be some of that, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that...
But it's certainly non-biblical. There's nothing in the Bible that would ever encourage us to pray to Mary. I mean, that was certainly, I don't know when that came about, as some papal decree that was special. But even, some of the shrines, people pray to dead saints and
I have this gal that lives by us by the lake. She's very into her Catholic religion. And I think every morning she does her Hail, she gets her beads out and does her Hail Marys for, it's some kind of a ritual she goes through every day.
Yeah. Well, I think, the rosary beads isn't a bad idea. I mean, that you're going to pray, you have, and each bead represents somebody you're going to pray for. And
That's the case.
it's certainly a prayer reminder, kind of like having your prayer list.
We traveled around and visited a lot of basilicas and such.
Okay.
And it really bothers me that they have a full-sized Christ in the grave. I mean, it's in the box, full size, with a glass so you can see it. And it really, really gets to me.
Well,
I keep saying, I start singing it from the grave.
Well, just that Catholics tend to have the crucifix, Christ on the cross. We have an empty cross.
Yes.
And we have an empty tomb for sure. And I'm sure I know the Catholics believe that too.
It's full-size body.
Right.
Understood that.
So there is a difference, I think, between idols and statues. And the second commandment, some people would say you shouldn't even have any pictures of Jesus, like Cody Bacham. And he thinks that's breaking. I was reading about Yancey, and he was saying that the church he grew up in, they didn't have any pictures of Jesus in their church because they felt like that broke the second commandment. A graven image. I mean, I don't, but Exodus 24 through 5, we talked about the curses, which is a hard verse, but then we talked about how if you dig deeper, God's not going to punish a child for the parent's sin, that each person is punished for their own sin, and the Bible does make that clear. However, there are tendencies, and if, like even with Abraham lied about his wife Sarah, Isaac lied about his wife Rebecca. You do have that tendency, and we talked about how, Diana said that to me. She'll say, well, that's what your dad used to do, That's true, and the Progressive Insurance.
Become your mother or
Yeah.
your mother.
Well, and I'm sure you ladies have the same issue, you're doing something and you think, why, that's what my mom did.
I wish I'd always do what my mom did.
Or what's that old story about the lady that always cut her ham in half before she put it in the oven? And somebody asked her, why do you do that? Well, she says, my mom did it. And then they figured out the reason mom did it is because the oven was small and they couldn't fit the full. But, our personalities certainly are shaped by our parents. John Piper commented on the third and fourth generation to explain that more too. We went through that. Then not taking God's name in vain. We talked about how the scribes treated God's name, how they would, they'd wash the pen, they washed their hands, it would take it'd be a long time if you came to a passage with a lot of God's name on it, you'd say, oh man, it's gonna be a long day, But that just showed what respect they had for God. And, in the word for God is Yahweh. We translate it usually Jehovah or Lord, depending on which translation.
We couldn't even say, when I was growing up, we couldn't say golly or gee.
Well, and yeah, that's true. Euphemisms are, like even darn and stuff like that. I think I was taught, you really shouldn't say that because, and I don't think it's intentional, when you say golly that you mean, but to automatically say, oh my God, that's really kind of taking God's name in vain, I think. God bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I need all the blessing I can get.
Yeah. I read about why people say that. It's because they thought you'd lost your spirit when you sneezed.
Uh-oh.
Oh, never.
Well, when you're sneezing, you can't do anything else.
You can try to hold it in, but you blow out your eardrums.
You can't drive very well.
Yeah, no.
Because you shut your eyes when you sneeze.
So then we talked about the Sabbath. We talked about that, talking about going to extremes. We read the Little House on the Prairie portion where she hated Sundays because she couldn't do anything. And then one day, she just decided, I've had it, and she ran off with the dog and played with him, and then her dad said, you're gonna sit down. And it's it's almost Pharisee type, rules that you couldn't do some of those things. And Jesus made it clear, you're to do good on the Sabbath. Today, of course, Christians, we use, the Lord's Day because that's when Jesus rose from the dead. So we celebrate on Sunday. I told you that we had my daughter had a guy from Nicaragua come up, and he was like a Messianic Jew almost. I've never heard of a Nicaraguan Messianic Jew, but he thought it was just terrible that that they didn't celebrate the Sabbath. And, well, he also believed in flat Earth, so it gave me a little input on his background. And then, then honoring your parents. And the results in society of that not happening is bad. And it's almost encouraged sometimes by some people, by some leaders that, this whole transgender business, where, they're trying to keep it secret from the parents that their daughter is being, given a chest binder and stuff like that. I mean, it's terrible. And I told you the story about a parent at PACT when their daughter went off to, I know for Ramsey, one of the professors there was saying, don't listen to your parents. They don't know what they're talking about. And that certainly wasn't what they got in the first 10 grades at PACT. So, and of course, the other side of it is parents don't, stir your children to anger, don't provoke them to anger. And that's the other side
My
too.
dad always read that verse, but he never read the opposite one.
Which was,
Your parents would read you the one part, but didn't finish it.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah. My brother had a friend who was really falsely accused of, because he was a brigade leader, and he got accused of abuse. And he got sent to prison. And he was white. And in prison, he said so many, because he was an older man at that point, so many of the younger men just kind of, really were drawn to him as a father image. And it's probably overstating it, but my brother told me, he says, in prison often, the white prisoners hate their father, and a lot of the black prisoners don't know who their father was, which just creates a lot of angst and problems. So,
Provoke not your children to wrath.
do not provoke your children to wrath, right? Did your kids ever, did Tasha ever come back to you with that one? Okay. Okay, so we are going through Exodus 20. We probably will finish it up today, maybe not. And this one we're going to talk about thou shalt not kill. And we were going to get into that a little bit. Before we do that, we're going to see a little video clip that just reviews all of the Ten Commandments.
And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by voice. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me, and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's.
That'd be a pretty tough one to climb. All right. Well, that gives a good, neat voice. That was, I think, Max McLean, being the narrator there. Does a lot of great narrations. Okay, so thou shalt not kill. Now, we mentioned last week too that that really means not murder. And this was, really a law and a rule way before. I mean, right from the beginning, with Cain and Abel, Cain rose up and murdered Abel. And God put a mark on him, and we don't know what that mark was, but he was marked as a murderer for the rest of his life. Everybody knew the mark of Cain. That used to be the name of, wasn't there a singing group called the Mark of Cain or something? Probably not a real great group. But now,
So they never knew what that image she put on him? Nobody ever figured
No.
that out, huh?
no.
Interesting.
Scarlet letter or something.
Yeah.
With an M, the scarlet M. But, Cain, God was merciful. God let Cain live, and Cain became, the ancestor of a whole flock of people that all died in flood. The only line that survived the flood was the line of Seth.
So what's the difference between somebody that kills and a murderer?
Okay, well, we're going to get to that. That's a good question. Because that, with that translation, and it is a different word in the Hebrew, that when God tells the people to kill in battle, that's a different word than going out and murdering someone. You get angry at somebody, you take a stick and slam him. I think the line is kind of, the Bible is sometimes kind of a thin line, between the two, I think. When you look at some of the judges. So, and we're going to probably do judges after we're done with this, but we're doing judges in children's church. But Ehud, the left-handed guy, so he went to Eglon. Remember he was left-handed, and so it was kind of disguised his motive. So he went in there, he reached across on his right-hand side, got the sword and stuck it in Eglon and killed him, and then ran away. Eglon was not a good guy. It was kind of like the death penalty because he had killed probably hundreds of Israelites. We don't have a lot of detail on that. And sometimes in the Bible, things are descriptive, not necessarily prescriptive. It's not giving somebody the right to go and kill the king of Moab, because you're mad at him. I mean, you could bring up the question, would it have been right for somebody to go in and assassinate Hitler? They tried. To stop the murdering, huh?
Bonhoeffer was part of that team.
And Bonhoeffer was part of that, right? He got accused of that anyways. He was in the planning, they say. The movie Valkyrie talks about that. There was one of the generals that planted a bomb in the meeting room where Hitler was going to be. And it was such a big, heavy table that he survived. But he heard the explosion, he thought everybody thought he was dead, and so he passed the word, and then the word came out, no, he is alive, So everybody else that turned aside, they're traitors. But we're a little off the topic, World War II history. So in the Torah, in fact, it says, I'm reading a quote here, in fact, never said thou shalt not kill, which would be in Hebrew to ter harag. The Hebrew word for to kill is harag, spelled he rish gimel. Instead, the Torah says in the Ten Commandments, which means thou shalt not murder, shamat. Though throughout the Torah, whenever it mentions capital punishment, it uses the verb harang, to kill, or yamat, he shall die, not tizrak, to murder. Similarly, whenever discussing matters of war, the Torah commands us to kill our enemies, not murder them, which would be a transgression of the Ten Commandments to do so. So I think you get to the point where there's prisoner of wars. Okay, if you kill them after they've surrendered, that would be murder, I think. But it happened. And I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, Americans did it in World War II also, So that's kind of the background of it. Now Quakers are known for being, nonviolent. Now, broadly speaking, there are 4 reasons why men objected to armed services during First World War. The most common ground was a religious one. Pacifism was a time-honored tenet of the Quakers. Although some Quaker men did enlist, other individuals, including Christian fundamentalists, took the Bible at its word, thou shalt not kill. The text's largest group of conscientious objectors were political activists of the left who saw the First World War as an imperialist war and as an example of the ruling class making a war that workers had to fight. So there's different reasons why people claimed the conscientious objector. Now my cousin, who's a medical doctor, he was a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War. And I don't know if you know this, but it didn't matter what your lottery number was. If you were a doctor, you all got drafted. Which seems a little unfair, but he did an alternative service, and he went to Rosebud Indian Reservation, and he was the doctor there for 2 years or whatever. And he has a lot of interesting stories about what happened at the Rosebud Indian Reservation and meeting some of the leaders like Dennis Banks and things like that. But just seeing, the devastation there of what alcohol does to a society. So the commandment was given to an individual, not a nation. Nations are given authority to protect life by taking a life. The 3 largest denominations in the United States are split on the issue of capital punishment. Roman Catholic Church opposes it in virtually all cases. The Southern Baptist Convention approves of it in certain cases, and the United Methodist Church opposes it in all cases. So that's interesting. So Southern Baptists, which we would be probably the closest to, A resolution adopted in June 2000 convention affirms the use of capital punishment by civil magistrates as a legitimate form of punishment of those guilty of murder or treasonous acts that result in death. The death penalty should be used only when there is clear and overwhelming evidence of guilt. The proposal says it also calls for vigilant justice and equity in the criminal justice system, with capital punishment applied as justly and as fairly as possible without undue delay. Well, that's something. Without reference to race, class, status of the guilty. Of course, we have seen news reports where there have been people that have been put to death or were accused of murder, and DNA evidence, which is better now, said they didn't do it. So, then you don't want to give capital punishment to somebody that's not guilty. So, that's a tough one. But it's interesting, a person can't do the capital punishment themselves. There's these people, the families of people that, murdered their little girl or whatever, they probably feel like that they want to take justice into their own hands. But that would also be murder. So the Roman Catholic says, assuming that the guilty party's identity and responsibility has been fully determined, the traditional teaching of the Church does not exclude recourse to the death penalty, if this is the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against the unjust aggressor. Now, there is that prison in Colorado, max security, and there are people there that, for whatever reason, they didn't get the death penalty, but that El Chapo, the big drug dealer, certainly responsible for the murders of many people. And he was an escape artist, whatever prison they put him in, he bribed the guards and get out or dig a tunnel with a spoon, And so he's there, and I think the Unabomber is there.
And Charles Manson probably got transferred there too.
I think he's still in California. He applied for parole, he didn't get it. No. Sirhan applied for parole, the guy who killed Robert Kennedy, he didn't get it either. So, I think that's an interesting thing that the Catholics have. Now, Chuck Colson is supposed, he did spend time in prison. He says, what about mercy? One can be inclined to ask. My response is simple. There can be no mercy where justice is not satisfied. Justice entails receiving what we in fact deserve. We did in fact know better. Mercy is not receiving what we deserve. To be punished, however, severely because we indeed deserve it, as C.S. Lewis observed, is to be treated with dignity as a human being created in God's image. Interesting quote there. That there are consequences. God gives consequences. And when you just say, oh, that's okay, you didn't really mean it. That's not treating that person as a human being made in the image of God. Now he says that I'm aware that sincere Christians stand on both sides of the issue. One's view on the death penalty is no means to test fellowship. While we take no pleasure in defining the contours of this difficult issue, the Christian community is called on to articulate standards of biblical justice, even when it may be unpopular. Capital justice, I've come to believe, is part of what non-negotiable standard, a moral obligation, requires civil government to punish crime, which we don't see as much, do we? And consequently to enforce capital punishment, albeit under highly restricted conditions. Fallible humans will work for justice. So, kind of some interesting perspectives there. I wouldn't want to be the one that pulls the switch on the electric chair. You know, I mean, I don't think there's many, I don't think many states even have the death penalty even more. I think Idaho does, and they've talked about this guy that killed the 4 students there at the Idaho College, that Idaho does have the death penalty. You know, this Murdaugh, we're going to get to that when we talk about lying, but, you know, it seems like, and yes, indeed, he did that, murdered his wife and son, and, but I don't think South Carolina has the death penalty, so. He got two life sentences, you know. I don't know how you get 2 life sentences, but to be practical, but I guess it's just for, we're not saying one life was as valuable as the other. Now, here's an advocate against, this is what he says. The Christian faith is fully and entirely pro-life, beginning to end. This commitment has broad enough scope even for the condemned. His name is Matt Arbo. Being has dignity, and no one, not even the monstrous, can lose his or her dignity altogether. I find Oliver O'Donovan instructive on precisely this point. If Christians take human dignity seriously, we should criticize any penalty that fosters attitudes of contempt towards the condemned. So, I don't know, what do you think? I don't know if the Covenant Church has a stand on that or not. I've never, we could find out from Steve, I guess. Well, now, as far as the death, as far as murder, Jesus certainly had some things to say about that as well, which we don't often. So hopefully I don't have some little advertisement here, but maybe we do.
I was down to talk to my doctor about Rudels's.
Ask your healthcare provider about Rudels's today.
There's our commercial.
There you go.
So, have you killed anyone lately? It's a legitimate question. The 6th commandment reads simply, "You shall not murder." At first glance, that looks like the easiest one to keep, doesn't it? Even someone who breaks the other 9 commandments, someone who steals and lies and covets and cheats and dishonors his parents and serves false gods, even someone who does all those other things might draw the line at murder. And if someone like that has reservations about murder, then you and I are probably in the clear, right? Not quite. There's a commandment in the Old Testament that warns us, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. What does that have to do with murder? Well, during his time as a human being, Jesus Christ taught his disciples that the 6th commandment deals with far more than just the physical act of murder. It deals with the thoughts and intents of the heart. Specifically, Jesus explained, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment." Now clearly there's a difference between hating someone and murdering someone. No one has ever gone to prison after being charged with attempt to commit hatred. On its own, hating someone has never robbed any families of their loved ones. And yet, Jesus made it unmistakably clear that in God's eyes, the emotion of hatred and the act of murder are on the same playing field. Why? It's because of what happens in the heart. Everything we do flows from our hearts, our thinking. And hatred is the seed from which murder grows. Externally, yes, hatred and murder are worlds apart. But internally, the damage we do to ourselves is identical. Murder stems from hatred. And hatred is like a poison that consumes us from the inside out. More importantly, the Apostle John tells us, if someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, how can he love God, whom he has not seen? Our hatred towards someone can strip us of a relationship with God. So how do we get past the hatred we might feel for someone else? How about doing what Jesus did? Turn the tables. Jesus acknowledged the problem, and he also gave the answer. Not long after his comment about being angry without a cause, he explained, you have heard it, that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Now, that's not easy. Our natural human reaction is to respond to hatred with hatred. But Christ is telling us, no, if you're really trying to be sons and daughters of God, you have to rise above your human nature. Jesus reveals that the key to changing our hearts is to take action, to love your enemies, bless them, do good to them, pray for them, do all the things that fly in the face of your human nature. And maybe you'll start to see that beyond that wall of hatred, there's a flawed, weak, or hurting person who needs God's love just as much as you do. Just because we've never murdered anybody doesn't mean the sixth commandment has nothing to teach us. The seventh commandment can help us see that it's not just what you do that matters.
Okay.
Well, that's to the point.
No, in murder cases, they always have to establish motive. And usually the motive is hatred. Like in Perry Mason, when they finally break down and say, yeah, I did it, why? Because he stole all of my money, or he stole my wife, or, I know they tried to establish motive with this Murdaugh guy in South Carolina. But we're going to get to the next one here. So Exodus 20:14. Why don't somebody read that one? It's a short one.
You shall not commit adultery.
Okay. So this commandment stands despite cultural norms in our world today. We can see today the human wreckage caused by unfaithfulness in families. Sometimes there's always, part of it, alcoholism plays a part. Just human nature, of course, plays a part. In the United States, they did some statistics. 30 to 60% of married couples will cheat at least once in their marriage. That's a lot. 74% of men and 68% of women admit they cheat if it was guaranteed they never get caught. 60% of affairs start with close friends or co-workers. An average affair lasts 2 years. Remember the Billy Graham rule and the Mike Pence rule. You don't go out with someone of the opposite sex. I think most pastors have some kind of rule that you're not counseling one-on-one, that you have resources so that you can get a woman counselor to counsel. Because even if nothing did happen, they might be accused of it happening. And I remember, I was at a luncheon with some guys I used to teach with, and And we were talking about the detention room, how as males in there was a room with no windows, and this guy said he went to the principal and he said, hey, he says, you know, I don't like this. He says, what if I get accused if I'm in there with one girl? And the principal just said, well, what about if it was a boy? You know, and that was his answer. Like, finally they did get windows in and keep the door open. But so, no, worldwide, here's the countries that have the most affairs. I don't know how they, you know, I would think most of these people would lie, you know. So his line is certainly tied to this one, I'm sure. But Norway's number 6. Sweden didn't make it in the top 6, so those Norwegians. Okay, France number 5. That makes some sense, what you hear. Germany number 4. Italy number 3. Denmark number 2. Number 1, Thailand. Thailand has a big, apparently, prostitution that's legalized and everything. So, of note, they wrote on this, women around the world are getting married later, and part of that is because women are getting more educated and investing in their careers, this Sawyer said. Noting a boost in the ratio of college-educated women to college-educated men, they've invested a lot of time and money in college, so they're getting a job and delaying marriage and not opting out completely. So that's kind of a trend in our world. Now, then you bring up the idea of bigamy and polygamy. Now that's still illegal in the United States. And we all know about the Mormons. I was going to look up how many wives Brigham Young actually had. I think it was quite a bit. It was 50-ish. And we talked about, you know, and they take it because, well, in the Old Testament they did it. You know, Jacob had 4 wives. And, well, Isaac only had 1. Or Solomon, I mean, Solomon had, what, 400 wives and 600, as the little kid in Sunday school said, porcupines. But, so when the Mormons, they passed that law specifically because of Mormonism, saying you can't do that, so they had to change. Now, I don't know. I don't think all of them did. There's offshoots of the mainline Mormon church that they still believe in it. I mean, and what are you going to do? I mean, and in some ways, I mean, they don't even have to legally get married. They could just say, well, we're just going to have everybody in this house. I don't know. So, but bigamy, you know, sometimes that happens when somebody doesn't get the divorce done right, or it's done in Mexico, and then it's not legal in the United States, and then they get charged with bigamy. That's what I heard. That was a Perry Mason case, I think. So, now, I asked a neighbor when we were down on Park Street, who was a Mormon. She had been a Baptist, and she converted to Mormonism. And I asked her about this bigamy, polygamy thing. And she justified it by saying, which makes some sense, she said, after the Civil War, there were so fewer young men, and there were a lot of widows and young women that didn't have a spouse, that it was the merciful thing to do to marry all of them. No, I agree, but I mean, you got to remember too, back in those days, there wasn't social services. There wasn't, you know, benefits for, if your husband died in the Civil War, you know, well, get married again, quick, you know. I mean, I was reading in Ruth, you think of Ruth and Orpha in Moab, their husbands died, Naomi's husband died, they didn't have anything. So, and she had actually told her, remember Orpha and Ruth, she says, you go back and get married again. She says, it's too late for me. And even if I did get married again, you're not going to wait for any sons I have to marry them. So just, but of course Ruth said, no, wherever you go, I will go. So, okay, so the next one is thou shalt not bear false witness.
I was just gonna comment, Promise Keepers had a very strong moral base.
Yes. Yeah, that's kind of faded now, hasn't it? I don't know if there's even the organization around anymore. They used to have big...
I think the leader of that got in some moral trouble.
Yeah. Very sad. So when we've been talking about the Ten Commandments in Children's Church, and I was reviewing that when I had Children's Church, and Jonathan, he asked two good questions. He says, and you got to remember, these kids, especially if you're from Liberia, you don't know this terminology. He says, what does it mean to false witness? And then he also said, what does it mean to covet? So I got to explain it to him, and I said, well, like in a courtroom, if you pledge to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and then you tell a lie, that's called perjury, and you can go to prison for that. And that's bearing false witness. And then I explained covet as well. So lying, big or little, it's wrong. We always used to say, well, a little white lie. It's still a lie. It may not have the consequences. It's not like you're lying in a grand jury, but and nobody's going to prison because you lied. But half-truth is another euphemism. Yeah, there's euphemisms for lying. So now one of the things that's in the news a lot, in Minneapolis anyways, and across the big cities, is carjacking. According to the Star and Tribune, carjackings in Minneapolis went up 537% from November 19 to November 20. And we're up another 40% from the first 10 months of 2020. In Minneapolis, the data suggests the police are making arrests in as few as 10 to 15% of all reported carjackings, which is a small sample size. Minors may be overrepresented in the carjacking arrest numbers because they are more easily arrested than other perpetrators due to the lack of planning, operating in large groups, which can also inflate arrest numbers, and inexperience with driving. Now, we all know what happened to Connie Cirillo. She was downtown Minneapolis in the George Floyd area, and I think she had a doctor, or a doctor appointment down there.
Yeah, she was meeting,
Yeah. And, somebody came up with a gun and said, get out. And she didn't. Yeah. And, you talk about scary. And then, what did he take her cell phone and threw it? He says, if you call anybody, he'll come back and kill you. Yeah. And it was like, she said he was like a kid.
Yeah.
He was, ninth grader.
12 years old.
Yeah.
Well, then a neighbor saw her and brought her into the house. I don't know if you heard that. But
Oh, okay, right. Which is nice.
she was,
There was a situation on 169 coming down from Zimmerman into Elk River. One morning, this gal was going to her nursing down in St. Louis Park. And somebody rear-ended her. And when she got out and pulled off to the side, he came up and she thought he wanted it was cold, and he wanted just to get in, And she opened the door to him, and he got out and threw her out and stole her car, They did finally catch him. They found the car, abandoned
He
somewhere.
pulled his fingernails out with pliers.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So you
so,
gotta make them attend something.
well, and of course, one of the issues this guy was 50 years old, I found out.
So he doesn't have the youth excuse, but when you catch a 15-year-old doing carjacking, most of them, nothing happens to them. They're minors, right.
Yeah,
So-
something should happen because the break them of the idea that it's gonna work.
Yeah, and, I mean, it's tough because if you send them to jail, they're gonna learn more bad habits than what they already have. And they're gonna be prey to in prison. So, now that carjacking actually happened on Bowers Drive. Somebody stole down the road from us. There was one of the new houses. And somebody caught it on a surveillance camera. Somebody went in, got a quick little jack or whatever, or they put it under it was a new Ram pickup. And they put it on and quick and they went down the road and they stole it. Later they found it up in Cambridge all burned up. So they probably, used it for a crime and then, so even in nice neighborhoods like Bowers Drive,
You always think, because you're on a cul-de-sac, that they wouldn't come down.
yeah, I mean, it's pretty brazen.
It's usually, you always think it has to be a dumb criminal, but then
Yeah.
why wouldn't criminals all be dumb?
And when you think of all the ex-teachers that live on Bowers Drive, they're usually more observant for wrong.
It's changed too, but somebody came in and did this, so.
Right, it wasn't somebody on the road.
So at first, everybody thought their car had been repossessed.
Right, that's what I thought at
Because they do
first.
that, they come and take
Yeah,
your car.
right. So it was that same machinery probably. So another thing that's in the news as far as stealing is looting. And in Chicago, where police arrested more than 100 people after rampant looting early Monday devastated the city's central business district, some local officials have blamed liberal policy changes by top prosecutor Kim Foxx for the shattered windows and raided shelves. Her changes lowered penalties for theft and shoplifting, and even local politicians have broadly supported criminal justice reform, have criticized Fox for choosing not to pursue felony charges against some of the people arrested for looting. Now, human nature would say, if nothing's going to happen to me, I'm going to do it.
There's several stores that are closing
Yes.
because of it.
Yeah, Walmart. Yeah, Walmart's closing in Portland.
Yeah. And that means that the people that use it all the time and live close to it, they have to go that many more miles to use the store.
Right. And I know in Baltimore, they burn like the Walgreens and stuff. Well, that's where all the seniors would get their meds. So.
Well, it happens here in Minnesota because over at Northtown, what is that Coke place there? The one.
Burlington.
Yeah, I know this gal that is the manager there, and she said they'll come in and take coats and we're told not to do a thing and they just walk off with it. And it happened, well, in our neighborhood, Davis's son-in-law, he was telling me he was at one of the shops someplace, he was gonna get a pair of jeans. And I think after he bought it, he was in the car and this big fancy car pulled up and all these people got out. And they went into the store and pretty soon they come out laughing with all this merchandise. And so after they left, now I don't know if he got license or what, but he went into the shop to see if the person was okay, and he was, and he said something to him, he told them that this has happened several times to their store. So what happens if it's under a certain amount of money, they don't do anything to them, but that isn't right.
And I don't blame the store employees.
Oh, no, they're told not to.
Right, I know. And I would be okay with that if I were working. I'm not gonna go sacrifice my, tackle somebody going out the door.
Well, this would be several people, so there.
Right, yeah, and you could beat them.
So it does happen in Minnesota too.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
In our area.
Well, they, down in, yeah, after the George Floyd, there was a lot of
Became much
looting.
more.
Yeah.
Well, what's happening in North Minneapolis is the same thing, just because of that. And they don't do anything, so now the stores say, forget it, I'm not gonna stay here.
Yeah, right.
And they're moving, and so
Yeah.
now you don't have that, and that's exactly why they're doing that.
And you don't have the, like the, for getting meds or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're hurting their community.
Yep.
And I don't know if it's necessarily people from that community
Well,
that
no.
are doing it, or if it's,
Yeah, well, down in Atlanta, they said that just about all the people that were involved in that were from out of state.
in some other country.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
Somebody's paying for them to go there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's, and I don't know what we can do except, support the police to say, and whoever, you vote for, the mayors to. So, we're gonna stop at this point. We'll go into false witness, and we will talk about the Alex Murdaugh trial. And just in closing, it was interesting watching the judge at the end of that trial. He used that old phrase, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we first practice to deceive." And that was part of what sentenced him, was he had a history of telling big whoppers all along. And by the way, that quote is from Sir Walter Scott, I found out. 1808, so some things haven't changed. And the juror that was interviewed said that the clincher was that Alex lied for 2 years that he was not in the kennel. And then the phone conversation exposed him with his voice talking in the kennel, 20 seconds or whatever before.
What I always wondered is they found no blood on him. After he had committed this.
Yeah, well, he must have got rid of the clothes real quick.
And how they never found the,
Their guns.
or his clothing. Usually, when you walk the FBI, they find it in a
Right.
garbage
Yeah,
can.
but FBI solves it in 1 hour.
Yeah.
This was 3 years old, this case.
Well, there was insurance too that he was collecting.
Oh, yeah, he was lying through his teeth to his people that he was investing for, Ponzi scheme. He's still facing those charges, so. But that's why it was really amazing that he got convicted, because they didn't have the weapon, they didn't have the blood evidence. It was the juror that said that they decided in 45 minutes that he was guilty, and it was mainly based on that he lied.
Well, when he said, finally said, well, you what, and he was sleeping someplace else.
Yeah. And
That's
some
what
other
the
things
whole
have come out now too, that of his history that weren't even brought up in the trial, of his violence in the past, so. Anyways, thank you for coming.
Oh, my key is still out there.
She's a kid.
Well, I bought one of those steering wheel locks, but I never figured out how to use it.